Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and I introduce myself. My name is Cecilia Bittoni. I'm the program manager of the Decade Collaborative Center for Coastal Resilience. We are hosting our last webinar of the series, Coastal Resilience webinar series of the season. And we will resume to a new season starting September 2025. Our webinar series are organized in collaboration with our the DCCCR partners, which are SAMS. Oh, let me share my screen. Share. Okay. Our webinar series is organized with our partners, which are CMCC and Deltares. Just a reminder of who we are. The DCC is a Decade Collaborative Center under the United Nations Decade for Ocean Science, and we specifically work on Challenge 6, which is increased community resilience to ocean and coastal risks. And we operate under the objective of a safe ocean. We now have a partner alliance network, as I mentioned, with CMCC and Deltares. I can leave you 30-second slides on, so to encourage you to scan the QR code to connect, to subscribe to the newsletters, and follow LinkedIn, Deltares LinkedIn, or to subscribe to check our websites. We will write the links to our websites and our email address also on the chat that you will be able to see during the presentation. Okay, so we are very pleased to have Virginie Tassin Campanella presenting a webinar on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction and the role of science in the implementation of the agreement, the BBNJ Agreement. Virginie is a legal expert on ocean governance and international law of the sea. She is a founder of her own law firm, VTA Tassin, which is focused exclusively on the ocean. Virginie holds a dual PhDs in law from the Sorbonne and Melbourne. Virginie is a member of the Paris and Zurich Bar. She operates under the two jurisdictions, and she was named Attorney of the Ocean by the Les Echos for her leadership in the law of the sea. She advises government, international organizations, NGOs, private actors across sectors such as conservation, shipping, mining, and climate. Her work bridges law, science, and innovation, and she's an expert with expertise in this specific agreement, like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the International Maritime Organization, and the FAO framework. She also serves on the advisory board of several, the ABLOS. Maybe Virginie, she can tell us more about this advisory board. And she also speaks and holds lectures at several forums, including Harvard and UN Ocean Conference. So we welcome Virginie. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just a final question before I leave you the floor. Let's final slide. I encourage the audience to submit their questions through the Q&A section. And the webinar will last about 40 minutes and 35 to 40 minutes, and then we leave the opportunity for Virginie to answer some of your questions. So I now leave the floor to Virginie. I exit my presentation, so you can now share yours.
Okay, thank you, Cecilia. Thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. Can you hear me properly?
We do?
Yes. Can you see the slides actually as well?
Yes, now yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer all questions, including the strange acronyms of the advisory board that I'm part of. ABLOS is the advisory board on the law of the sea. It's part of the International Hydrographic Organization. INDEMER is the Economic Law of the Sea Institute of Monaco. So you know all the acronyms. So I hope today you're not going to be afraid of seeing a bit of legal words and wordings. I've been trying to keep it as simple as possible and make sure actually you could understand what is the strange animal of the BBNJ Agreement, what you can do with it, and why it's actually important for you as scientists to actually understand this new type of agreements. So maybe before diving into the BBNJ agreement, I'm gonna explain the context because I know you're not legal experts, so you can't actually know everything. And actually the specificity of the BBNJ agreement is that it's an agreement that is attached to a bigger one, a framework agreement, which is called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So I'm going to explain a bit what is the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, why we've been actually attaching a new agreement to it, what are the main objectives and pillars of this BBNJ agreement. And finally, I'm going to dive a bit more into the role of science and the stakeholders. So I've been willing actually to talk about stakeholders because I don't want you to consider just science as composed of scientists, but also all the sectors that evolve around science, including innovation and technology. So let's start first with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is a framework agreement that was adopted in 1982. Is the first convention that aims to regulate all marine spaces and all activities. So it has a very universal ambition, universal reach. It aims to provide equality among all states. So as it is an international law agreement, it's targeted to the state and created by the state. So it's always the mechanism in international law, by the states, for the states. And the goal was actually through this agreement in 1982 to really promote equality and equality of chances of all states. Because as you know, if you look at the history of the 20th century and the change of geopolitics, there's been a lot of events before the 80s, including decolonization, the Vietnam War, very important oil crisis, a lot of issues linked to the development of technology and science. And so a lot of developing states were actually getting worried that they will not be benefiting from really the opportunity to exercise their rights, for example, of fishing, in the same way, for example, than France, because they didn't have the capacity, they didn't have the industry, they didn't have the knowledge. So international law before UNCLOS existed, but didn't include these new stakeholders, these new developing states at the round table of the negotiation. And so UNCLOS was really there in the negotiation of the 70s to put everyone at the same table of negotiation and make sure that the rules negotiated will be reflective of all kind of interest, state interest. What actually the convention did that is very interesting is that it created different hats of responsibilities of states. So you have, of course, the coastal states, but as you know, not all states have a coast. You have also landlocked states. You have different type of authorities that were created also, which is the port states and also the flag state. So the flag state is actually when you operate, you conduct activities on the vessel, a ship basically, and the ship is actually navigating everywhere. So wherever you go, actually in the ocean and the sea, you are under the authority of one specific state, which is the flag state. And then you have another type of states, which is the sponsor state, which is another type of control, which is exercised only for deep sea mining, but I'm not going to talk about it today. And so the main goal of UNCLOS, this, beyond actually providing and promoting equality and effective equality in the exercise of rights, was actually to make sure that we will maintain peace, justice, and progress for all the peoples. So basically creating a level playing field where everyone will actually abide and agree by the same common basic rules. And that's what we call the legal order for the sea and oceans, which is actually a way to create a balance between economic activities, protection of marine resources, and the interest of mankind as a whole. And I think that a reference to the preamble is quite interesting for you to understand the ambition of these instruments, saying the achievements of these goals will contribute to the realization of a just and equitable international economic order, which takes into account the interests and needs of mankind as a whole, and in particular the special interests and needs of developing countries, whether coastal or landlocked. So it's extremely ambitious, and you see that we have actually a kind of vibe of sustainable development already inserted into this preamble that was actually drafted in the 70s and adopted in 82. So now you have a graph to actually explain how this Love the Sea framework has been regulating the marine space. So you have different type of maritime zones, which are sort of boxes where lawyers have been creating different type of rights and duties. And so the closer you are to the coast, the more rights has the coastal states, and the farthest you go to the sea, actually from the coast, the more activities are actually open, and you have what we call freedom of the high seas, where you have freedom of navigation, scientific research, laying of submarine cables and pipelines. And so you see the interest of having different hats of authorities for the states. You have the port states, the flag states, the sponsor states, and the coastal states, which is a way to make sure that any type of activities will be effectively regulated and controlled wherever you are. So here you have another graph which explains a bit more the strange way lawyers have been cutting the marine space into boxes. And basically for you, what is very important to understand is that you have two main types of maritime spaces. You have those that are within national jurisdiction, which are in orange, and those that are in blue, which are beyond national jurisdiction. So beyond national jurisdiction, it means that there's no appropriation, there's no sovereignty. It means that the resources are res communis, they belong to everyone. In orange, you have sovereignty and certain type of rights, for example, exploration and exploitation of marine resources or mineral resources on the continental shelf. And what is also extremely important, especially for the BBNJ agreement, is to understand that you can have an overlap. So, for example, if you operate in the high seas, you see the oil platform. It operates, it's actually situated in the high seas. It has a sort of pipe mechanism that is using the water column, but then it dives into potential national jurisdiction because it could be on the extended continental shelf. So it means that when you are operating activities, scientific research or exploration, exploitation, or whatever, even maintenance of cables and pipelines, you need to understand that the way the marine environment is regulated in boxes that are always kind of overlapping, which makes it quite complicated. So what happened with UNCLOS? UNCLOS has now more than 170 states. It is a universal treaty, a bit more than 170 if I remember. It's one of the longest negotiations in the history of international law. 9 years of negotiation. There's 320 articles that were adopted. This is extremely big. And what happened is that this convention is function as a package. So it means, like, for example, if you were a state and you were in a disagreement with one article or one party of the convention, you couldn't actually opt it out when you ratify. You have to ratify the whole package. It was actually to ensure that there will not be a pick and choose system and then a horrible maze and puzzle to reassemble depending on which states ratify what and which excluded what type of provisions and parties. But what happened is that despite the fact that the convention was adopted, there's been a lot of disagreements about the some parts of the convention despite its adoption. And some states actually say that they will not ratify the convention unless some changes were made, and it was mainly changes related to the deep sea mining parts. So I'm not going to talk about it today because we're not here to talk about deep sea mining, but just to explain that you can have very long negotiation, you can have an adoption of an international text without having the will of states to actually really ratify the instruments. And so the question was how to not throw, in the bin 9 years of negotiation and 9 years of work, 9 years of money actually invested by states. And at the same time promote a sort of adaptation of the rules that were adopted to kind of safeguard this convention and make sure it will be really ratified one day by the states who actually criticized it. It was mainly developed states. So what we did is that we created this sort of mechanism. So what happens is when you have a very complex, long, sensitive international treaty, you can't just reopen it and renegotiate it because the deal you manage to have at T1 might not be achievable at T2 because there's always different type of geopolitical interest, conflicts, economic changes, and so it's extremely difficult to ensure if you reopen it that you will be able to close it. So what the negotiators did is that they invented a mechanism of a sort of plugins. So we keep the UNCLOS, so the framework agreements, and then you insert specific agreements that will actually have to be implemented in synergy with the framework. But this plugin helps to actually modernize the convention, fill up gaps, for example, or provide more description or institutional arrangements. And it's a way actually to modernize the UNCLOS without reopening it. So to date, we have 3 plugins. The first one was the part that was the implementing agreement that was adopted in 1994, which was related to deep sea mining. Another one was adopted in 1995, which is related to straddling and highly migratory fish stocks. And we had the new one, which has been adopted but is not yet in force, on the contrary of the 2 first that I mentioned, which is the BBNJ Agreement. And the BBNJ Agreement is an agreement that applies only beyond national jurisdiction and has a limited scope because it's only dedicated to regulate the sustainable use and the conservation of marine biological diversity in area outside of national jurisdiction. So now I'm going to dive a bit more in the BBNJ agreement and explain you basically the ambition and how it could be actually interesting for you to better understand this ambition, because you have a very important role to play in the implementation of these agreements. So just to do a quick recap, the BBNJ Agreement, this acronym again, stands for the implementing agreements of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea on marine biodiversity of area beyond national jurisdiction. Basically, the legal title is 5 sentence long. This one is a condensed one, but what you need to remember is that it's very specific to marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. The work actually on this agreement started around 20 years ago, started with ad hoc groups, working groups, and then it got formalized in 2016, 2017 with what we call a preparatory committee, which actually led to a UN resolution of the General Assembly, which convened the start of the international negotiation, where you have all the governments coming and starting to negotiate a text. This text was negotiated on the basis of different topics that have been actually identified throughout the years. So that's why we call it a preparatory committee. And the prep committee was actually there to be able to assess if the negotiation will be feasible or not feasible, or if we had to keep on working on the preparatory work to ensure that the negotiation will be able to be efficient and effective. And what happens is that we had negotiations, so formal negotiation, between 2018 and 2023. But what happened between these years is, of course, the COVID crisis. And so the negotiation were kind of suspended for 2 years, because you can't negotiate on Zoom. You have to negotiate international agreements in person, because the corridors, talk of all the delegates are extremely precious. So states kept on working, but without formally negotiating. And now we're actually hoping to have a ratification potentially quite soon. At the moment, we have a lot of countries which signed. So this BBNJ agreement was adopted formally in 2023 in June. It's been signed to date by the 137 states, which is a lot. But again, you can have a lot of states signing and never ratifying. It's quite common in international law. So this number, you need to be quite cautious about it. At the moment, from what I understood, and it still needs to be verified, there's 50 states who have ratified. And for the agreement to enter into force, it needs to be 60. So we are actually quite close. And you see actually the trend between the orange and the green geographical distribution. You will have the slides, so don't worry, you don't have to take too much notes. What is important to understand is that this BBNJ agreement negotiation were actually quite tough, because they've been done under the basis of a compromise, because states were very worried, states and international organizations, for example, the IMO or the Antarctic Treaty System, or for example, OSPAR, they were very worried that we will add another layer of international frameworks and that it will be too heavy for them to keep on operating on their own expertise. So negotiators came up with the principles that I will not be able to explain today, which is the principle to not undermine. Means you should not undermine the authority of existing bodies and frameworks. But what is important to understand is that this agreement was not supported by everyone, and very big maritime powers, for example, Japan, Russia, or for example, South Korea, haven't been supporting these agreements and might not ratify it. But now let's focus a bit more on the content. So, as I told you, states in the preparatory work have been identifying actually the key objectives that this agreement should reply to. The main objectives are 4, and they actually have been designed on the basis of a legal loophole we actually identify in international law, because the high seas has always been regulated, despite what you hear in the press. And the main goal was actually to keep the freedom of the high seas alive, and it was the state interest to keep this space open to all, so they can conduct many types of activities without having too much restriction and control and authorization to seek. But because of this, there were some loopholes, especially with regards to the protection and conservation of marine biological diversity. And so, for example, if you wanted to create marine protected areas in the high seas, it was possible, but it was more difficult because there was no standard and common rules accepted by all. So, for example, OSPAR, the regional organization OSPAR, already created marine protected areas in the high seas, and they actually managed to do it within their own framework. But to be able to export this at the international level and make sure that all the type of marine protected areas will follow the same type of models, you need to actually create an international agreement where everyone agree on the same rules. So area-based management tools was very important. It's called area-based management tool, which is, I think, a horrible term, but it's supposed to be generic to include marine spatial planning, any type of protection zones, because you have many types of protection zones, ecological corridors. So it's really the way you want to manage the marine environments in the high seas. Then another pillar that was very important was genetic resources. Genetic resources have never been included into the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, because in the 70s, no one had any idea about genetic resources. So no one actually thought of including this type of resources into the text. And basically, these resources have been included into international law later on by the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992. But this convention only applies within national jurisdiction. So it means that in the law of the sea, genetic resources beyond national jurisdiction were not regulated yet. So that's why this topic was actually included into the BBNJ Agreement. Then you have another thing that was extremely important was actually to set common rules and standards and thresholds for the conduct of environmental impact assessments for all activities in the high seas to actually protect and conserve the marine biodiversity. And this is the first time that we actually managed to create a framework on how to conduct environmental impact assessments. What does it mean? How is it applicable? How is it reviewed? Who should participate? So it's extremely important. And then you had the final pillar, which is not new, but it was included because it was not enough implemented by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and of course not adapted to the specificities of biological resources, which is capacity building and transfer of technology. So you can imagine, of course, that if you have transfer of technology already provided in the convention but related to deep sea mining, it will not be the same type of transfer of technology with regards to the sustainable use and conservation of marine biological resources. It has nothing to do. It's not the same type of technology. So you see that all these 4 different pillars actually require very robust scientific knowledge, ocean data sharing also, technological tools to observe, collect, share scientific data information, basically for the management of marine biological diversity. So, because the agreement deals with sustainable use and conservation, I wanted to explain what is sustainable use and conservation. Sustainable use, actually this term, apologize, I have a cold, has never been mentioned in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And basically, the definition adopted in the BBNJ Agreement says that it means the use of components of biological diversity in a way and at a rate that does not lead to a long-term decline of biological diversity, thereby maintaining its potential to meet the needs and aspirations of present and future generations. So of course, you need to have scientific data and research on this. Conservation is a bit different because conservation is a term that has been used in UNCLOS in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, but there's no specific definition that has been given in the BBNJ Agreement. So it's a bit of a gray area. What is important here to understand is that, of course, to achieve sustainable use and conservation, you need to have scientific data. And it's a way for the BBNJ agreement to kind of boost or further promote the need of scientific research to implement actually these objectives. So basically, just to recap for those who don't know much about marine scientific research is a freedom of the high seas. You don't need any authorization. You can just conduct marine scientific research, but you have specific type of limitation. You have to respect the rights and duties of other states conducting activities. And you have also other limitations, including the fact that it needs to be for peaceful purposes. But then when we talk about marine biodiversity, what is marine biodiversity? It's a very, very broad, term. So there's no definition of marine biodiversity. There's been a lot of debates during the negotiation, basically because states were wondering if they wanted to include also fisheries. Originally, states didn't want to include fisheries because fisheries have been already heavily regulated through the second plugin that I mentioned, the agreements of 1995. And so there's been a compromise that was made. They've been excluding fishing and fishing-related activities from the scope of the BBNJ agreements, as well as fish and other living marine resources known to have been taken in fishing and fishing-related activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction. But basically, we see the scope of marine biodiversity through two articles: the definition of genetic resources, which says that it's any material or marine plant, animal, microbial, or any other origin containing functional units of heredity, of actual or potential value. So you see it's extremely broad. And also the definition of biotechnology means of any technological application that use biological systems, living organisms, or derivatives thereof to make or modify products or processes for specific use. So you see the ambition of the agreement is extremely broad: conservation, sustainable use, marine biodiversity. So now I'm going to explain quite quickly three main features of the BBNJ agreements where science and the stakeholders play a very important role. The first one is for everything related to area-based management tools, so the way you manage the ocean space. There's been a specific process that has been set up that you see here, where actually the identification of the area management tool is based on base scientific information, and also science is extremely needed in the consultation phase because any type of stakeholders can participate. It means that your university, you as an expert, or even the state, the institute, the school, whoever wants will be able to participate in this creation and management of protected areas. So for the proposals are made on the basis of best available science and scientific information, and you need to take in consideration many different types of elements, including description of the state of the marine environment, biological diversity, sustainable use objectives, but also any type of other information, for example, economic and social factors, information on consultation undertaken with indigenous people or local communities, for example. In the consultation phase, as I told you, it's open to everyone, so you can provide further inputs which can help you to comment on the scientific best available science and information that was used in the proposal, or to add information, or even to critique, to actually share disagreements about the way the proposal was made and what it should take in consideration. Another thing that is very important is the environmental impact assessments. So these environmental impact assessments will be required for any type of planned activities in the high seas, which means that could be actually applicable also on marine scientific research. It's binding, and it's a way to make sure that an activity will not cause substantial pollution or cause significant and harmful changes to the marine environments. So this is the main thresholds, but these thresholds will have to be break down in various indicators. And so the role of scientists will be extremely important in defining actually these indicators. Again, you have a lot of things to take in consideration in the environmental impact assessments, including direct and cumulative impacts, impacts that also are within and beyond national jurisdiction. So you have the ecosystem approach, which is extremely important. And you have also the importance of the degree of scientific certainty or uncertainty, which will trigger different type of decision-making under the precautionary approach. What is interesting to know is that the type of knowledge that are required to be taken in consideration in the impact assessment is not only hard science, but also traditional and cultural knowledge. And so it will be interesting to understand how we can integrate or reconcile scientific and traditional knowledge system, and if this should be made, at the beginning, for example, of the assessment, or further integrated in as a comparison or a way to enrich actually the impact assessment that has been made, for example, only on the basis of hard science. So this is actually to be decided, and I think each state will be able to decide what to do. Another innovation that I also told you about, it's the public consultation. So not only science and stakeholders, including different type of technology and infrastructure are needed to collect the data, to feed actually the proposal of marine protected area and impact assessment, but also your knowledge is extremely needed to be able to review what has been made and to monitor what is being made on the basis of best available science. So there's many different entry points where actually science is extremely crucial. So to summarize, the role of science and its stakeholders are first to support decision making. So for conservation measures, support tools like protected areas, and also enables the implementation of the precautionary approach. But also what is really interesting is that the BBNJ Agreement, because it has a very broad scope, reinforce the importance of the freedom of marine scientific research, encourage, of course, more research to be done to enhance biodiversity identification, taxonomy, but also, of course, the understanding of the functioning of ecosystem, which is, I think, the end result of the identification of the different components of the ecosystem. And it goes beyond hard science. And so it means that there's an active participation of science and its stakeholders, including in the what we call the clearinghouse mechanism, which is like an online sharing platform where you can actually share different type of data. So data related to genetic resources, data related to protected areas. So for example, for the proposal, the review, if it's successful, not successful, should it be, for example, the protected area should be slightly adjust because of, for example, of movement of fishery stocks due to climate change. So all of this could be shared. And state party will have to ensure actually public access to this BBNJ scientific data. So state party means Italy, France, whoever your state is. So here we see that there's always this willingness of international law to make sure that any type of state, even if they don't have wonderful research capacities, will be actually able to access the data and the knowledge to develop products and services. So for example, if I take Switzerland, Switzerland is a landlocked state, but it has fantastic research capacities and a lot of industry and technologies, including for pharmaceuticals. So they might be very interested in actually being able to access this data from other type of states who have the research capacities on site actually in the high seas. To finish, the implementation challenges, and this is like an important opening. The main challenge we see in the high seas with biodiversity use and conservation, and more specifically related to marine scientific research, is the cruel lack of funding of marine scientific research. Most of the activities collecting data are actually private activities, and so the data related to marine biodiversity is actually locked in private actors, with private actors who actually invest a lot in, for example, deep sea infrastructures or vessels and monitoring services that are actually costing a lot of money. And so we need to develop sustainable financing models to make sure that this data could be unlocked while respecting at the same time the initial investments and the economic models actually of these actors. There's also issues with data access and ownership because some data could be actually recognized as sensitive, also for defense, acoustic, security purposes. If you share too much data about biodiversity, it could be used not only for the good purpose, but also could be targeted by certain actors to conduct very intense fishing operations. So we need to be very careful about this. And what is important to understand is that in international law, we've been already facing these type of issues, although we're still, at the beginning of the regulation, because if we take the models of deep sea mining, the International Seabed Authority, in its exploration code and exploitation code quite soon, has posed a duty on the contractors, the deep sea mining contractors, to release all the environmental data they have collected in the deep sea after 3 years. So you can have mechanism where this data that is privately held could be actually released. What is interesting also is the dynamics between private and public actors. How do you promote common goods? So the interest of the whole, of the community, of the management of biodiversity for all the stakeholders, local communities, you, me, the states, international organization, and deal at the same time with this economic and private interest. And the final point, actually, is the cruel lack at the moment of what I call the global data governance. So there's a lot of data with different standards, different quality, and if you want to share it and make sure it's used properly, combined, for example, to develop predictions or modeling, you need to have certain qualities and certain standards, and at the moment, it doesn't exist. So to be able to really move forward with the implementation of this BBNJ agreement, there's a lot of work to be made by scientists and those involved in the science world, especially technology and innovation. I hope this presentation was interesting, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Virginie. It was extremely interesting to me, and I think to the whole audience, and many questions come to my mind. But I go first to look at the question from the audience. We have 3 questions at the moment. You can read them if you open the Q&A session. The first one is from Urias Taylor. Why does it appear that the BBNJ agreement seems to override most of the other agreements, especially the agreement for commencement of deep sea mining? Okay, so I think
Okay, I can answer this question first. I think it comes back to what I mentioned at the beginning that I haven't been able to explain in this presentation, is the principle to not undermine. So the negotiation and this agreement exists because basically there's a deal that has been made that all existing agreements are not going to get undermined by this one. So the BBNJ agreement is a sort of chapeau you put on the top of it, which provides standardized vision, and then what exists within each of the different sous-chapeaux still exists, and the challenge will be actually to make them cooperate together. So this is a very important challenge of consistency. There's a lot of legal challenges where, for example, you have one state that operates in France, another one that operates, I don't know, in another state in the developing world. You don't have the same requirements, and then, it's very complex. But it's not actually overriding at all. And this is a legal obligation. So all states and international organizations will need to ensure that there will not be any overridence, basically, of the BBNJ agreement. Otherwise, the whole system will collapse. When it comes to deep sea mining, it's also a chapeau, and the implementation of the BBNJ agreements into the deep sea mining regulation of the International Seabed Authority has been taken in consideration in the current negotiation of the exploitation codes. So if you look at the exploration codes, the environmental impact assessment is completely far away from what states have negotiated under the BBNJ agreement. But since states are negotiating at the moment the exploitation codes, they've been inserting the concerns and the requirements of the BBNJ agreements into these exploitation codes. So it's a very complex machine.
Yes, I can, I read always there are, I mean, Urias is also asking if we can share the slides with which we will. And also she's saying, he's saying, if there are like, and I go along with another question I had about, some countries don't seem to have a lot of knowledge on marine ecosystem. And she's asking what are some of the strategies that will be out in place to help these countries upscale and increase capacity. And I would like to add another part of this question, which is there any pressure that citizens and scientists can do to governments to ratify the agreement? Because if you go back to, I mean, from the previous map where you showed how many countries actually ratified the agreement, there are only 50, and Italy is not one of them, for example. So what are the suggestions?
So I can maybe start by the last question because it's the easiest.
Yes.
When we talk about ratification, it's not a signature. A ratification is a complex process because it needs to go through the parliaments of a country. And so what happened is that, with all the political struggles and valses around the world, sometimes you can have one government who's been there the whole negotiation, and because there's an election process or a change of majority at the government, then you need to redo the whole thing, and it takes time. So I think what is very important is actually for citizens, for stakeholders, for the private sector, for universities, to actually already understand what is at stake and prepare. And of course you can lobby if you want the government and organize events to talk about, for example, the implementation challenges that I mentioned, because any type of sectors could actually start designing strategies for the implementation without waiting for the ratification process. And I think it's the best way to do it because, politics are always very frustrating. Lawyers are not really into politics. We're more into the roots. The politics are just the waves, coming and going. And so I think what is very important is to focus on the roots and the preparation. And there's a lot of work to do, even at the university or institute, research institute level that could be done. When I come back to the question on capacity building, it is actually one of the main pillars of the BBNJ agreement. Unfortunately, it's one that I did not have time to dive into. It was capacity building and transfer of technology. And of course, it's a recognition also that not a lot of states have knowledge. And one of the ways to remediate this is actually through the boost of marine scientific research and the promotion of open access data sharing to make sure that any state will be able to access this data, but also receive capacity building programs actually which will be designed. And to make it efficient, basically it means that states will need to fund this. So if they ratify, It means that they will be obliged to implement capacity building. So there will be new financing schemes that will be put in place. I don't know the ambition of these schemes. I don't know, you know, how it could be done, but I know that at least it's been included. And because it's been included, it has to be targeted to the objectives of the BBNJ agreement. So, and I think it's really interesting also when you look at transfer of technology, because as I told you, biotechnology is actually expressly mentioned in the BBNJ agreement. So there's a lot of, you know, technological stakes actually, and economic stakes in this agreement. It's not just an environmental agreement. It's also a very important economic agreement with a lot of economic activities. So this capacity building, this access and sharing of data related to marine biodiversity is extremely important.
Okay, thank you, Virginie. I think we have time to two more questions, maybe one. I mean, there is a question by Leili Osibal that asks if you could explain or elaborate on how the BBNJ could affect existing regimes like the Antarctic Treaty System. There is a quick explanation.
One of the if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned actually the Antarctic Treaty System, the IMO, and OSPAR. I actually picked these three because these three have been actually very active in creating protected area or management tools actually beyond national jurisdiction. So SPAR created marine protected areas, but also the Antarctic Treaty regime has been creating marine protected areas around the Antarctic. And what is difficult in the relationship between the two originally is that the Antarctic Treaty was viewing the BBNJ as the one giving the orders how to create the marine protected areas around the Antarctic. Actually, because of this not undermine principle, it will not be the case. So it means that the Antarctic Treaty, when collaborating and discussing, negotiating with its own member states of the Antarctic Treaty, we have to take in consideration the standards that are adopted by under the BBNJ agreement. But what will be very interesting actually in the Antarctic treaty system is that not all states will ratify the BBNJ agreement. For example, Russia said that it will not ratify. So the whole BBNJ agreement will not have to get implemented straight away to this regional framework because its membership is not reflective of potentially the membership of the BBNJ agreement.
Okay, thank you. And like I tried to combine quickly the last three questions by Emma Reyes. She first asked if digital twin on the ocean can contribute on to the type of observation data and predictive modeling for the BBNJ agreement. And I think you already touched base on that, saying yes, this is what is actually needed. And the question on how many science-based KPIs be developed to evaluate the effectiveness of the environmental impact assessment under BBNJ. This is like, I don't know, it's not a 1 minute question to answer, I can imagine. If you know, probably there is not a unique answer to this question. I would imagine you don't know how many KPIs. You can start evaluating what's needed.
Yes, indeed. Maybe I can answer those two. So for the digital twin of the ocean, I think it's important to step back a bit and realize that there's already platforms providing open data sharing. For example, JEPCO, the general bathymetric chart of the ocean that is really specialized on seabed mapping. Some of you may know the program Seabed 2030. It has a new strategy for the years to come, where he wants to actually gather all the type of data, including on the benthic organisms and geological formation. So it's not just, you know, what is trendy, the digital twin. There's also very important existing platforms. JEPCO exists, I think, since 120 years or something like this. So it's important to keep your compass, you know, open to everything that exists. The current issue with the digital twin is actually the sharing mechanism and the fact that you can collate and assemble a lot of data coming from different type of sectors that are not standardized. And so if you conduct predictive models and especially if you do provide recommendation for the policy on the basis of data coming from different sectors that are not standardized, you can have very important bias, which could be actually quite dangerous. So you need to be very careful about it. Theoretically, it's wonderful. Technically speaking, there's a lot of things to improve. For KPIs, as I said, also the BBNJ agreement, because it's international law, it's there to provide the common agreement, the frameworks. And then the COP, the Conference of Parties, will have a scientific committee, which will actually kind of provide guidance with, I think, KPIs and indicators and everything, and then states in their own national jurisdiction. And I think the European Union will also adopt their own KPIs and indicators based on basically their specific policies. So you can still have differences. For example, if you go to, I don't know, Argentina or France or Canada, there could be actually differences, and it's normal because it's always like this.
Yes, thank you, Virginie. Okay, there are other questions, two more questions. I don't think we can answer both. Maybe we can try to one. And then if you agree, we can give the people who would like to ask you more questions your email, and they can send you an email. If you can, if you agree, we can write your email in the chat so they can contact you directly. Let's go to 1 minute for the last but one question. Could you elaborate on how BBNJ agreement defines or approaches best available science, particularly in light of knowledge from indigenous and local communities?
Okay, I can even do the last two with the question of Torsten. There's no definition of best available science. It's evolving and always depending on the case and the moment. So it's something to be reassessed. It's not set in stone. And it's the approach of judges also when they interpret provisions. And for Torsten, no, there's no new creation of a new science policy interface. Because there's no need to create a new one. I think the main goal of the BBNJ agreement is actually to improve what already exists and not create new tools that will actually face, you know, legitimacy, credibility, funding issues. So it's really strengthening the cooperation frameworks of what exists. And so the BBNJ portfolio will be added to all the different type of frameworks. So you just add another hat, basically. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to be on time. And again, I would suggest audience who has question maybe to write to us, to the DCC. You will find our link on our email on our website. And we can forward the question to Virginie for an open discussion. Thank you again for this very, very insightful presentation and useful for the scientific community to have a broad idea on what this BBNJ and all the agreement, the legal agreement are on the sea. And see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.